It is the advertisement strategy that allows a brand new Etsy shop to have this kind of growth. The first month it did $600, then we quadrupled the month after that. Then because this is where we turned on advertisement, then we doubled that. Now we're in between seasons, so we kind of had a plateau, but Christmas is coming up and it's going to be right about here. So whether you're getting ready for the holiday season or you just open an Etsy shop or it's right before Valentine's, whatever you're trying to do, advertisement strategy or having a sustainable advertisement strategy, a strategic advertisement strategy is going to be absolutely critical. It is not something you get to use or not use. It is fundamental for your Etsy business if you're looking to grow your Etsy shop, you're growing your Etsy business. Now, this is the most transparent Etsy or YouTube channel about Etsy, about growing an Etsy shop that you're going to find. Because what I'm going to say is this $12,000 is profitable. It is a print-on-demand Etsy shop, but it's profitable at 15% profit margins. But here's the caveat. The longer we get to advertise on Etsy, the more profitable it'll become. And we'll talk about that in this video. We're also going to talk about should you advertise listings that barely exist on Etsy? Should you turn them off? We're also going to talk about return on ad spend. Is that important? If we were losing money, should we turn this off? And by the way, this is one of my pet peeves. And when people are running Etsy shops and they're just turning off advertisements that is not profitable because they think they're going to be profitable if they're filtering it out like that. But you're doing that because you don't understand the correlation between advertised listings and an organic listing. Now, granted, I do turn off listings that are like no longer relevant, like a post-season. If there's a season-specific product, like Halloween is over, that means I have to turn off anything that is Halloween. If Thanksgiving is 2 weeks away, I start turning it off, and that's really, really important. But it's really important to understand the correlation. We're going to talk about that in this video. We're also going to talk about what campaign strategy you need to use for your Etsy business. We're going to talk about why I always maximize my advertising spend. All of that we're going to talk about in this video, because if you're new to this channel, I've sold on Etsy for about 7 years. I've manufactured my own product, always manufactured my own product, and I've sold over 200,000 sales on Etsy. That's obviously correlating in multiple seven figures. That's top line revenue. Again, the most honest YouTube channel you're going to get, so make sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification. Now, I currently manufacture for print-on-demand sellers. I've gotten into the print-on-demand space, and this video is going to be absolutely critical if you're a print-on-demand seller. Because we manufacture for multiple Etsy shops, and collectively we do anywhere from $6,000 to $15,000 in top line revenue each and every day, and we manufacture for those Etsy shops, and we get to see this data, and that's the data I'm going to share with you guys, how we structure strategy where these Etsy shops are successful, because I'm behind the scenes helping them grow, and this is one of those Etsy shops.
All right, before starting in this video, I wanted to preface some things because I realized that this is going to be a fairly aggressive advertisement strategy. Now, I've always had an aggressive advertisement strategy, but one thing you'd probably be asking is, how could you be aggressive with advertisement on a product that doesn't sell well, that keeps losing money? Should you continue to be aggressive? Well, the answer is obviously no, but what oftentimes people assume that the advertisement is the problem and not realizing that there's a problem within the listing. Your listing's just not selling, and that's why you turn on advertisement. But then your advertisement is shown that this listing is not worth selling and it's costing you money. So instead of just turning it off and saying, well, the advertisement don't work, why not realize that your listing is the wrong listing? Either you're selling it wrong or you're selling the wrong. Okay, you're selling it wrong. Could be maybe you need to improve the quality. Maybe your thumbnail is not good enough. Maybe your price is too cheap or too expensive. You got to play around with the listing itself. Now, you could also improve your order value. Oftentimes people break even on advertisement, but if they were to just improve their order value, meaning upselling something and bring that additional $10 on average, there's your profitability. So you got to sell it right and figure out how to sell it correctly. And the advertisement is just going to show you how well you're doing with the listing, how well you've done with selling your listing or making sure that your listing is ready or competing on the marketplace. The second thing is selling the wrong, meaning it doesn't always necessarily mean you're selling the actual product that's wrong. Maybe you're selling to the wrong customer. Like, for example, if you're selling leather wallets, you can switch, instead of just doing personalized leather wallets, shifting that attention onto groomsmen gifts and then focusing your attention on that. Or recently I've talked to somebody that sold furniture, and their solution was to switch that furniture onto kids furniture, and more specifically non-coded furniture for kids or something like that. I'm not too familiar with that whole ordeal, but That was the shift that they needed to make. They didn't need to change the whole inventory. They just needed to change who they're targeting. So it's those things that you got to solve. The advertisement is not the problem. It's just going to show you that you have a problem. And so that's why I continue to run advertisement, because if something is broken, I will see it sooner and faster and fix it. Like, for example, holidays coming up. I don't want to find out that I'm selling the wrong product or there's something wrong with my listings. Like when we're in the middle of holiday, I want to fix it now. And that's why I keep running advertisement and I fix it as it's running. So again, this is what I'm doing. After watching this video, you're obviously going to come to your own conclusion, but having an aggressive advertisement strategy is not a bad thing. Oftentimes, it just leads you to faster decision making. And after 7 years of selling on Etsy, decision making and changing and adapting has always been a muscle that I've actually been flexing and I've actually been practicing. So, and that's not something that you need to be able to do as well. So without any further ado, let's get started with the video.
Let's talk about the correlation. That's the first and kind of the cornerstone of all advertisement. Now, this is kind of a recent piece of information. When I started opening up Etsy shop, maybe at the start of this year, maybe a little later, what I've noticed, and this is new, and maybe it's a little bit conspiracy, but Etsy is a lot more pay to play than you realize. Now, when you get your first 3 sales on Etsy, generally, most of the time, they're organic sales. But guess when you'll get those sales? You'll get those sales quite literally almost on the day of you turn on your advertisement. Even though the sales are organic, but they happen when you turn on advertisement. Now, call me crazy, but that's a bit of a pay to play. I thought organic should be organic and advertised should be advertised. But there is an explanation to this. Maybe a little bit of conspiracy is kind of healthy for us to think that Etsy wants to do business with somebody that is willing to share the profits and therefore is going to rank your listings, encouraging you to advertise. So that's a thought. But fundamentally, the correlation is this. The first correlation is you spent $123 on 205 sellers. And so therefore you think that you've only really spent for four of those sellers you've invested. But what you don't realize that these 201 sellers are going to come back on Etsy the next day or the next week, and guess whose listing is going to rank on page number 1 for them? You are, because you already paid for them. You paid for that front page alteration. That's the first correlation. When you're doubting whether you're going to sell or you're profitable, zoom out on a few days before making the conclusion. And this is a good example. Yesterday, we had a horrible day. We had $70. There's a horrible day. We spent $70 or 100 and something on yesterday. Yeah, we spent $103. Now, I think we got one at like early in the morning a.m., so it really doesn't count technically. But we spent like close to $100, and we only made... let's go back here. We only made $75, but guess what happened the next day? Boom, we broke even. Now, we kind of broke even, but you zoom out far enough, you're going to get to that 15% profit margins. Now, we'll talk about where that profit margin grows the longer you get to advertise, but that's the idea. You got to zoom out. You got to realize that a customer is going to be moving around, and Etsy makes most of their money by retargeting your customers that you paid for. So if we go to statistics, we go down to this, we'll realize majority of the traffic comes from Etsy app and other pages. Think of this as a front doorman that stands in front of the store looking at your attire. Let's just say you walk into a clothing store and say, hey, you look like a leather fella. You would be interested in our leather jackets over here. And you're like, oh, you're right. How did you know? Oh, I know. And then they probably have some ways to figure that out. Now, I don't know if that's how it works in the real world, but Etsy kind of takes that data that those customers come in that you paid for, and they're going to recommend your product. The front page of their Etsy app is going to have your product. They're going to pop up on the sides, hey, hurry up, the sale is ending. All of that's going to happen here. But we're so focused on Etsy ads, we don't realize there's a bigger journey that the customer will take, and that Etsy is going to retarget those customers, again, that you have paid for. You've paid for these customers. All of these customers you're paying for. So that's the first correlation. The second correlation is all of these customers are doing clicks. They're behaving a certain way. They're building a profile of what's called a lookalike profile. I don't know if that's an official term, but They're building a profile that the next time 205 customers will come, or 300 or 400, if they match the almost exact description of by clicking, by having certain favors that these customers have, or a certain amount of similarities, then Etsy's most likely will advertise or recommend, again, Etsy app and other pages is going to recommend to those customers, their first page is going to be your product. There's a better chance your product will rank for them as well. So this $123 is going to be spent on future customers that will come in. That this is why your profit margins is going to grow, because you're building a profile. You're growing on the algorithm. There's an organic listing that's moving up the ranks to sell to the right customers. Remember, Etsy wants to sell the right product to the right customer, and this is what we're building. So when we're talking about building an Etsy shop, we're talking about really building a profile, a placement of your listings on the marketplace, and that costs money. Now, in our case, we're still profitable, but I've actually been part of some Etsy shops that we've grown that haven't been profitable for the first 2-3 months. And that's with intention. We want to position ourselves first before we make money. And a lot of Etsy shops that I know, the top sellers, they position themselves even before holiday season. They're okay losing profit. They're okay breaking even, but they want to position their listings to be profitable. So this is a correlation that you have to understand. The next correlation I want to talk about, and this is why I like this data. I like this small data. This is the correlation. Remember, if you are more likely to click on a product, you are more likely to buy, okay? Think of it that way. So, for example, you're running down the beach. There's a booth that sells washers and dryers. You're like, that's kind of weird. Why are they out here on the sand selling washers and dryers? Doesn't make sense. Wrong place, wrong time. But then you run past and they're selling refreshments. You're like, oh, perfect. You're more likely to check out the booth. You might not be happy with the prices and you might keep running, but you're more likely to buy something you're running up to. So that's kind of the same thing. So if there's a higher click-through rate, they're more likely to buy. Now, this kind of voids this data. Now, even though there's zeros here, but because there's not that much data, you really have to void this. So think of it this way. If we can scale these listings to hundreds of listings and we have a higher click-through rate, we have higher volume of higher click-through rate listings, we're more likely to be profitable. And that's why I encourage a large listing volume Etsy shops, because you have more of these customer specific listings. Like these 85 people were looking for a smiley face dog collar. Now there's not much of them, but they're more likely to click and there's a higher click-through rate. They're more likely to buy. So creating a product not for the general public that everybody's going to love, your mom, grandma, and aunt is going to love it, but you got to create a product specific to the right people, because Etsy's motto is special and unique, right? And sometimes special and unique is only applying to a few people. So this is where Etsy ads doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists with a strategy that you're going to rank up your listings to where you're going to be you're going to scale up the idea of higher click-through rate products. Now you're thinking, Vlad, but what about listings that have low click-through rate? Well, Etsy's not even going to advertise. That's why Etsy never advertised on listings that don't have a high click-through. So if you create a listing that's not clickable, don't worry. Just leave it. Let it be. Don't worry about it. But you got to keep creating listings so that more and more listings find these things. That's why you should never stop creating listings. In parallel with you creating listings, you're going to advertise, you're going to pay for these listings. Well, guess what? You're investing into listings that have a higher chance to sell. Again, we're ignoring the zeros because this is not conclusive data, where this kind of voids this part of the equation. But if you're scaling this up, you're scaling it up on listings that have a higher chance to win, okay? So back in the day, when you have 1,000 listings that were mediocre and bad, you would say, well, you're going to waste a bunch of money because you're scaling up a lot of bad listings. But Etsy doesn't actually spend that much money if the listing's not doing well. So your objective is to create high volume of high quality listings. Then you're more likely to spend money on Etsy. But now you're spending not on just anything. You're spending on actual high click-through rate customers, which means they're going to more likely to buy. So let's just take a look at statistics once again. So we're going to correlate conversion with click-through rate because it does correlate. So let's just take a 30-day, for example. We're going to take a conversion. Look at this, the October 5 and maybe October 15. Guess what's going to happen on those days? Boom, these are peaks. Because if we're finding more listings that do this, we're going to have growth. That's the idea. The more listings, the more growth. Okay, this is why I continue to advertise listings, even though they're little. Again, this is part of a bigger picture. We're going to continue to advertise. And then let's review it again, that I don't turn off even if it's non-profitable because of the correlations. And then I don't turn off the little listings because of the scale strategy approach. Okay, so that's how I'm approaching this. That's how I'm going about it. Okay, now, if you're not profitable, what's going on? Now, if you're selling things like t-shirts of products that don't sell well, a lot of this is not going to be appropriate for you because I'm selling dog collars. By the way, if you want to be part of the seller program, I have a seller program of a print-on-demand relationship with where we can manufacture your product. We actually do the personalization for you too. You don't have to do that. Quite literally, it's the most hands-off print-on-demand business you're going to get if you're in the personalization space. We sell dog collars. It has two very important things. It is a need-based product and it's a want-based product. Need-based, you can't have your dog run around without an ID tag. The want-based product, not everybody likes the same color. They like their own little variation, which means you can create this high-volume, high click-through rate product. This is why if you have these two things, then this is going to apply to your product, but it has to apply. Now, if you're manufacturing your product and you have a 10 to 20 listing Etsy shop, then your objective is to increase the click-through rate, because a higher click-through rate then will make this kind of important, because you're not looking at scaling vertical, you're thinking of, or horizontal, because even though this is vertical, we're really scaling horizontal with a higher keyword library. In this way, you're going to scale vertically, you're going to scale deeply. So your objective is to improve the click-through rate. So out of as much, we can get as much people to click on us out of these. So that's going to be your objective, which the result of that means you're going to be focusing on your thumbnail, maybe price, maybe upsell something, or increase the revenue, increasing the total order value. So there's a bit more play. Now, here's a side note. When you are selling if your strategy is to scale up to a high click customer, you are more likely to get away with higher prices, because if they're looking specifically for that product, and that's quite literally to the graphic design, it's exactly what you're selling, they're going to be more likely okay to pay $5-10 more because they found exactly what they're looking for. So a print-on-demand model is more profitable. And that's why the more listings you buy, the more you advertise, because again, there's correlation, you're positioned to the right customer, the better conversion rate is going to be. That's why I said the more I advertise, the more profitable it's going to be. Even though right now it's 15%, but it can get to 20 to 25% very, very comfortably. Or maybe I want to increase the velocity and I want to reduce prices, or I want to increase the prices or reduce velocity and increase prices, and that's fine too. So that's the strategy that I take on. Now let's go to the campaign. Let's talk about what strategy when I just start an Etsy shop, I always go with this. Or before a holiday season, I want to get that data. I want to push that data. Now, once the holiday season is over, or you've kind of already gotten your plateau, you go to efficient spending and you're going to be profitable, because it's only going to spend money on high click-through rate products. This one, just don't do it. I think this is a waste of click. I think they wanted 3. This basically says, hey, spend even less, right? This just basically saying not only on the high click-through rate, but if they're too expensive, don't invest. Now, there's a whole math to this I'm not going to talk about. But if you want profitability, you really don't want a growth anymore, click on efficient spending. That's totally fine. Now, I always maximize, because I never want to lose potential. When you're just building an Etsy shop, it's not going to give you $1,000. And in fact, it's going to see how much opportunity or potential your Etsy shop is going to have, and it's going to give you that dollar amount. And so this is when I'm just building an Etsy shop, really isn't an indicator, have I reached my full potential with an Etsy shop. Now, this Etsy shop has a little over 100 listings, and I'm going to continue to add to this Etsy shop. But yeah, I always maximize it because it's never going to spend the full amount. But because I'm increasing the volume of my Etsy shop or listings that have high click-through rate, I know that the money that's going to be spent out of this will be profitable. And again, I'm growing my Etsy shop, so it's not even about profitability. It's about positioning my listings. So that's how I see advertising. Now, we could talk about profit margins, how to calculate, but you don't ever want to look at revenue directly. You always want to look at revenue to a total. So, for example, if it's $13,000, and you always want to look at the revenue to how much you spend. So if we do 13,000, So we did 5.7 to 13, or 6,000 to 13. Now you could say, well, that's almost a half. Well, that's because I'm building, I'm growing. And that distance between top line and spend is going to get bigger and bigger, and you're going to get better and better profit. And you're able to increase prices because, again, you have a better click-through rate. Your strategy is vertical or horizontal in this case. So that's the strategy that I implement, and it is a profitable strategy, and I've always stuck to it. It is interesting that Etsy's more interested in a pay-to-play approach. So you can't get away without advertising, or at least being aggressive to some point, to some degree, and expect growth on Etsy unless you find a product. And I have done that before, a viral product that just does well. I've had that before, but it's not sustainable if you want to build a consistently sustainable business. All right, guys, hopefully you like this video. Like it if you did like this video. If you have any questions, comment down the bottom. If you want to be part of the seller program, check out the link in the description below. And until next time, you guys have a great one.